Okay, guys, I'm here by myself today. Laura couldn't make it, but Phyllis and I are very excited to talk about both of our professions, which is psychotherapy. And Phyllis wrote an amazing book that I'm really interested in diving into today. So, if you want to give a little intro to your book, that would be great for everyone.
Sure. So I've been a psychotherapist for over 30 years and lots and lots of experience working with families and individuals and children and couples. And a lot of what psychotherapy focuses on today is our underlying family dynamics and conditioning. We're all born with our own nature, but our conditioning has so much to do with what we believe and how we behave and how we form or don't form relationships and how we are in our communities, in our schools, in our churches, and in our government. And so it wasn't a far cry for me to realize that all groups of people operate on some kind of a family dynamic. And most of us take what we learned about our role and how to cope and how to survive in our own family, we take that with us wherever we go. And to the extent that our families were healthy and cooperative and loving and supportive, and people had good boundaries, and there were some, healthy ways to deal with conflict, we're great, and we bring those skills with us into our adult relationships. But many people have been traumatized. Many people have been abused, neglected. They've had role models for men and women that are very unequal. They have poor role models for how to resolve conflict, often with one person dominating and other people being forced to submit, or there's been overt abuse and neglect. And so what happened for me a long time ago was I couldn't help but see that our nation also operates on family dynamics. And I had to ask myself, are they healthy? Are we treating all people equally? Do we discriminate? Do we actually target certain people for abuse? Do we blame people for the abuse that we heap on them? And then do we blame them for their symptoms? Do we silence truth tellers, or do we want to hear everybody's side of the story and sit down with good conflict resolution skills and actually try to work out our differences? And of course, in some instances we do, and in some large groupings and institutions, people are committed to those kinds of values, but in a lot of ways we're not.
Mm.
Um, and I couldn't, I have felt like I had to write about that. I felt like we're being kind of conditioned to believe that we're suffering from this huge partisan divide, that some people are good and other people are evil, and the good people have to wipe out the evil people. When we know in our own homes that that doesn't work. What works in our own homes is love and care and good boundaries and peaceful conflict resolution skills. And so felt like I had to bring that conversation to our country because we're suffering such severe escalation in hatred and discrimination and divisiveness and violence. So that was the root of the book, and the book is called America in Therapy. How could we bring the best principles of healing our great divide and our conflict to a country? So the book is called America in Therapy: A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. And and I'm excited about it because, when I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, I've never heard that lens on our country before." So I think mental health is the big missing piece in our politics, in our culture. Um, that's my
I
intro.
thought I joked years ago that I would run for president, but nobody would elect me because my plan would be like a 10-year plan. And the 10-year plan would be to focus on families. And there are programs that already exist where case managers, nurses, therapists work with a family and they work with them until from birth until the child is 5. And these
Oh,
programs have amazing results.
of
Amazing
course.
results. So I was like, we just need to implement more of this stuff and heal on a family level. And then I think, would be a healthier nation. But obviously, nobody wants to vote for that.
Right. But
That's,
I 100% agree with that. I think the bottom line is that a healthy nation, just like a healthy family invests in the welfare of the family members. And a
yeah,
healthy nation does the same. And I totally agree 100% that our most valuable resource is people and families and how we bring up our children. Because when children are brought up and they feel safe, and they feel loved and they feel valued for who they are, and they really feel like they have a sense of safe belonging, they don't become criminals. They don't become rapists. They don't become tyrants. They don't. And we
yeah.
see,
Yeah, I was just talking to a client the other day about she was like, my kids don't listen. And I was like, oh yeah, because to get obedience from a human, I think the only way to do that is to be authoritarian and to be abusive. And so you're not going to get 100% compliance from children, and that's okay because that's them asserting their independence and their um autonomy, at least from my perspective. What would you
well, I
think?
think it's a healthy balance because I think having a healthy sense of equality, we're all equal, we're all worthy, doesn't mean that in certain roles people need to have appropriate healthy authority. Certainly, parents need to have that, or their kids won't learn healthy boundaries. They won't know how to be in society in a way that's cooperative and functional and the big thing is, and again, nobody does this perfectly. No parent does it perfectly because I don't think there is perfection in it. I mean, we're all children, it's finding that balance between letting your child have a sense of their own personal will and their own autonomy and creating some boundaries around them so that they're safe and that they're safe for other people. Um, and that's just an ongoing dialogue. And there's lots of skills that people can implement, and nobody does it perfectly. And some children are more difficult by nature to kind of rein
Yeah,
in than others. But it doesn't mean that it still can't be done with a sense of love and care and firmness. And I think that's the challenge that we have with each other as adults
yeah,
in our society. So the same, the thing that I was going to say is that one of the things that I think is so hard, and I learned this as a parent, and I saw this with so many parents that I worked with, is that when a child is really upset or really oppositional, um, it's really hard to tolerate our own distress. We
yeah,
think we're trying to manage our kid, but really the first line is to manage your own distress at their, unwillingness or whatever it is to comply or behave or whatever we want them to do. And once we can manage our own distress, then it's easier to make firm boundaries and tolerate their distress because that's what they need to learn. They need to be able to tolerate their own distress without acting out on other people or themselves. And these are obviously, when I say these things, this is a societal adult issue as well as
yes,
a parenting issue, right?
yes. I love that about the things I learn in parenting is that it all okay. So let's think about it from a
Mm.
workplace perspective. Uh, Employees like to be praised. Employees respond to at least intermittent praise and reward. And
Totally.
the same thing goes for children. And then the same thing goes for our romantic relationships. Like the
Right.
what is the I don't know, I don't remember exactly what the statistic is, but it's like for every criticism you have to have seven praises or something like that. Is that the
Mm.
ratio?
Well, something like that. It's like we can take feedback that's difficult to take better if we also feel affirmed and seen for our good qualities. That's just human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, my daughter was telling me that she wanted to sit her friend down and tell her the things that bother her about her. And I said, well, be careful with that because, I mean, by the way, she's 9. And I said, just imagine if somebody sat you down and told you all the things that annoyed them about you. She was like, I think I would be fine. I was like,
Right.
we usually don't respond to that very well.
But it's such a good point because within a container of love and care, it's much easier to take a look at ourselves and be honest about where we need to upgrade our own behavior.
Yeah. And I like what you said about nobody does it perfect because that's something that I think I've noticed a lot of humans struggle with is this desire to be perfect and show up perfect, and it's an unrealistic goal.
Yeah, it's actually unattainable, I think. I mean, anybody who's had a child probably knows, and it's not just having children, but in an intimate relationship or in a work relationship, but especially if you have a child, I think you know that your child will bring up, as well as the love that they evoke and the care and the, incredible bond that you can feel for a child, which is, an incredible experience. They'll bring up all your unresolved issues right away. Right?
So true. Okay, so how do we bring therapy principles into our world right now?
Yeah, well, I think we were talking about one of them, and that is that um, people are actually our most important resource.
Yeah.
Healthy people, I've said this so many times, we talk about weapons and we talk about defense and we talk about borders and we talk about, all those things like that. But in our own lives, we know that what makes us safe is one thing, and it's safe people.
Yeah.
We are safe when we're around safe people. And that principle has not spread out to, the way we look at ourselves as larger communities, and certainly not as nations. And so that's sort of a bottom line. But I have so many things that I talk about in my book that I take straight out of all of my work with families and individuals, because a lot of what therapy involves is kind of going deep into the roots of whatever the pain or the dysfunction or the trauma is that someone has sustained often in their early life, that has led them to believe not such good things about themselves, like I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm worthless, I'm stupid, I'm not lovable, I don't matter, I have no power, other people's needs come before mine. We learn all kinds of things from the negative conditioning that we have, and then we adapt by developing some kind of coping mechanism. And different people do that differently. One person might respond to a dysfunctional family by withdrawing and becoming really reclusive and shut down, and another might become very aggressive and angry and, verbally abusive or physically violent with other children, or become a bully, or become a people pleaser, or become, overachieving. Or become an addict at a certain point. So we have all different ways of coping with unresolved family pain. And unless we get some help for that little child in us that was hurt, and that little child in us gets to know, there was nothing wrong with you. What happened to you was not okay, but you're perfect just the way you are, and you've learned to
Oh,
believe things about yourself that are untrue. And good psychotherapy really helps take that apart. And what have we looked at? Well, let me just say one thing, and you probably know this as a therapist so well, that if you have a child, let's just say a child, in a school setting, who really is a bully and hits other kids, or verbally attacks other kids, or is always targeting somebody, the chances are very high that something's going on in that child's home life that has set them up to feel like they have to defend and be one up in order to survive.
yeah.
They're not a bad child. They weren't born that way. But their symptoms, and we know this in the field of therapy, their symptoms are what we call a call for help. Just
Mhm.
like if you have a fever, your body is calling for help. Something's wrong. There's a virus or a bacteria or something that you have that's causing the fever. And terrible human behavior is a call for help. So, what if we looked at the most symptomatic people in the family of America? The people who are committing outrageous crimes, who abandon their children or beat their children or rape someone or are highly exploitive or have no empathy for the people they hurt, they're calling for help for the dysfunction of the family of America. But what we do is label them as bad and throw
Mm,
them in prison and see them as untreatable. I did a lot of research for my book, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's way more than 50% of incarcerated people in America today have untreated child abuse or neglect of
yeah.
some kind.
Yeah.
And so, what if our commitment was to help people?
Oh,
If they've committed terrible crimes, there's a what if we were committed to like really going into prisons and saying, you are a worthwhile person. You did something terrible. What happened to you? What
yeah.
set you up? What set up the Uvalde shooter to go into an elementary school and kill children? That person was not born evil.
Did you ever see 13 Reasons Why?
No, what's that?
So I think Selena Gomez was behind the making of that TV show, but there were only two seasons. And in the first season, it's about a girl who commits suicide and she leaves tapes saying, "These are the 13 reasons why I committed suicide."
Oh,
And then in
wow.
the second season, which I thought both were great, I mean, there was a lot of controversy around them, but the second season basically shows how a school shooter gets created. And it was
Oh, that's
mostly bullying and isolating and all of that. And I thought they did an excellent job of showing the pain that's involved in all of this.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, and I did a little bit of research on the Uvalde shooter, and that was his story. Bullied. There was some talk that he had been sexually abused and not helped. I think he had I can't remember if it was him, but one of them had like a speech impediment, and then they were teased for that. Um, and so yeah, people, and not everybody who's bullied or teased is going to become a school shooter.
Right.
Um, but that doesn't mean that the person who does become the school shooter is evil. And in psychologically, we know that some people will learn to be helpless in the face of abuse and neglect, and other people will identify with the aggressor and
Yeah.
and become the aggressor. And they may not shoot up a school, but they may beat their kids. They may be horrible to their employees. They may be mean to their animals. But we have to know that if we really care for people, we look for the essence inside them and we speak to that beautiful, innocent essence that they were born with. Because that is actually one of the most important elements of healing. Obviously, there's other skills we need too, but that is a really important one. And I really learned that as a therapist, that there is nothing like seeing someone as an innocent, pure, essential being that has great potential if they have a chance to heal from what has hurt them.
I was just talking to a client last night. And she was being very self-deprecating. So I sent her a picture of me when I was like 5 years old, and I said, "Would you talk to her like that?" And
Right,
she said, "No, I can't even imagine that." And I said, "Okay, well, that's who you're talking to."
right. That's exactly right. And so many of those little 5-year-olds, which probably being a therapist, were talked to that way. And
Yeah.
that's what they internalized. And so they're just pulling back out what they have taken on. I've worked with people and you would never know. And I think the average person doesn't know, the person behind the counter, the person teaching your kids, the person in charge of that office. You don't know their history.
That
Um,
is very true.
and so many people have survived horrible, horrible
Horrible.
childhoods, and they're doing the best they can to survive. That's what
Yeah.
they're doing. They're holding on by a thread.
Yeah.
Um, so, just to bring that kind of empathy and compassion and, who are you and how is your day can just light up somebody's life. I've had clients that never had anybody tell them they love them ever.
Oh, wow.
And that damages our psyche, and we have
Mm.
to know that.
It's so sad. And I've experienced the same. And
Mm.
um I'm feeling like a little tearful talking about all this because my daughter had a girl in her class this year who was a really big bully and everybody was complaining about her. And after the third complaint, I went to the teacher and I'm like, "Hey, what's the deal with this kid? Apparently she's like really hurting my daughter's feelings." And she said, "I'm working on it. Just give me some time." And recently my daughter said, this girl's not mean anymore. And she said she came from a school where everybody was really mean, so she didn't know how to be any different. So she's not really mean. And I was like, oh,
I love it.
oh,
I love it.
yeah,
And nobody is really mean. It's a defense against some kind of pain. And
yeah,
I just feel like I would like to see, when we talk about America, I would like to see psychology be, one of the basic elements of what we teach everybody so that we can understand ourselves, so that we can form healthier relationships and healthier families. I'd like to see, our tax dollars go into family programs, go into really good childcare, go
yeah,
into paying teachers better wages, training people in group dynamics and how to, especially in nonviolent conflict resolution.
yeah,
Start kids out that way, teach them compassion skills, like your daughter saw. What if every child had the opportunity to learn that, oh, that kid who's a bully needs help, not that they're a bad kid. How can we find them help? I would love to see that kind of nonviolent communication with a desire to resolve conflict be modeled in the highest levels of government. Right now, the role models for how to resolve conflict at the highest levels of not just our government, but all over the world are so violent. They're so um, they're so bent on domination rather than resolution. And of course, that's a recipe for war. And that's what we see.
yeah.
And to me, it just feels like, is this not obvious to everybody? But it's not.
Mm.
It's
No,
not.
it's not. I remember in undergrad, it was an elective that I took, and it was called Human Relationship Skills. And we were learning about the art of listening.
Wow.
But what was funny is every day we had to journal about our experience in class. And I was really frustrated because despite the fact that we were learning about listening, the people in my class were not listening.
Right. Right. Well, practicing what you learn and preach is a whole other ball game, right?
But that class was so good that I have told people I wish we started teaching this. And I know other countries do. And
Do.
that's the thing is there's
Right.
models for us out there of prison systems that aren't um, the dirtiest, nastiest places to be. There's uh, reformation programs that really work for people, and there's even teaching human sexuality. In our country we're so hush hush about everything, and then kids are shocked about stuff that goes on and thrown into situations with no understanding of what's going on. And in other countries, they start ed in elementary school. So, we have models that work. We just, I don't know, don't pay attention to them, I guess.
I think that's absolutely true. I think there are models all over the United States today, and a lot of them are volunteer. A lot of them are volunteer programs where people like see the need and they step in and provide it, or they find funding for it, which, sadly is probably going to disappear, a lot of that
Yeah.
today. I don't know. But that's really where I believe our money and our time and our attention should go. What are children seeing? Children mimic what they see. If they
Yes.
see violence, they're going to either mimic violence or retreat from violence. And of course, as a therapist, and you probably have the same experience, you see it all. You see parents who are unable to protect their children, and it's not because they're bad people, and it's not because they don't love their children. They've internalized this frozen place in the face of violence, and they actually freeze in the face of harm coming toward them or people that they love, and they can't move. And that's a trauma response. It's not a
Yeah.
sign of a defective character.
I would be curious what you think about this too. I went to a training with Bessel van der Kolk,
Uh-huh.
and he was talking about EMDR, and he said that EMDR works well if you've had one trauma. And I said to myself, well, shit, I don't know anybody who has one trauma.
Right. Right.
And in my experience, I don't know what you would say to this, but it seems to me that that we carry the energy of our trauma with us, and it attracts uh perpetrators.
Oh,
And then
totally.
the cycle just kind of continues, and it continues throughout families. And it's crazy because you're talking about these parents who don't feel like they can protect their kids, or they freeze. And I've worked with women who were sexually molested, and they protect their kids like crazy, like won't let them go anywhere, won't let them do anything, and they still end up getting sexually molested. And so it's kind of like, wow, what is really going on here?
Well, it's an interesting because I think it's complex.
Yeah,
You're talking about more than one thing. There are people who are harmed and they really have a freeze response and they really cannot protect themselves or their children well. Or they may try and then give up because it becomes overwhelming or the hopelessness kicks in. Um, and we also have a society. So we have that individual level, and we have people who are hyper vigilant. But hypervigilance isn't necessarily protection,
yeah,
if that makes sense.
it
Um,
does to
I
me.
think it's
I don't know if
important,
the
right? It's important to be vigilant, but so we have a lot of factors coming together. We have a society, as you said, that is on the one hand repressed about sex, or has an unhealthy relationship to sex in general. I think. It's not an open book. It's not just, we can talk about this in schools and it's a healthy thing. And this is how you have a right to say no. And, all the stuff that we want children to learn isn't necessarily in the movies. It's not necessarily in the social media. We have people in positions of power who, yeah, are charged with multiple counts of sexual, inappropriate behavior or worse. Um, so we have very conflicting messages about sex in our society. And so, to some extent, many children just aren't safe being in this society from what they're
that's
going to be
true.
exposed to, or people who have been harmed, who have not had a chance to heal. But hypervigilance can come from just an overwhelming amount of fear. And fear, that kind of hypervigilance, I think, actually communicates powerlessness,
Ah,
if that
that
makes.
makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah, but should we be vigilant? Yeah. Better safe than sorry is what what I
yeah,
would say.
yeah.
Yeah.
And to that point, and kind of tying in what we were talking about before, I worked for an agency that specialized in sexual trauma, and they also treated um, children and teens who were sex offenders. And one of the things that we were taught is that these the people who are offenders um, usually have three things in their background: severe domestic violence, sexual trauma themselves, or early exposure to a lot of inappropriate
Right.
sexual materials.
Right.
So
And I
it's
think
coming from somewhere.
100%. And I think that's sort of like a big missing piece in our psychological understanding of ourselves, which is pretty 101, right?
Yeah.
We're not born that way. A little baby in a bassinet is not a perpetrator.
Yeah.
Something happens to that baby that teaches them in some way that that's how they're going to survive, or that's appropriate behavior, or it makes them stronger, or something. Um, but we're not born that way, unless, I mean, maybe some very tiny fraction of the population has a brain anomaly that sets them up to be, out of control. But the average person is born totally innocent and pure. And I totally agree with what you're saying. And again, that just reiterates, what if we really focused on our families and on making this world safe for all our children? I mean, to
Yeah.
me, that's the answer
Yeah.
in a
And
nutshell.
that's more of a community mindset. And I tell people, I don't think our connection to each other was ever clearer for me until the pandemic, because there were literally signs in the grocery store, and there's signs now again about for eggs. But in the grocery store, it would say, please only take 1 gallon of milk because other people need milk, essentially. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
Um, and so, you know, I think a lot of times in this culture, in the US culture, we emphasize independent, self-made man. Uh,
100%.
don't tell anybody what you're doing, just do it. It's like there's a lot of that mindset, especially in the entrepreneur world, in the business world. Um, and we forget that nobody's a self-made man.
That's right.
Nobody. We all have mentors, we all have connections, we all have experiences that shape us into whatever we become. And so it's just very egocentric to say, I did this all by myself. If you bought milk at the grocery store, you didn't do it by yourself.
Well, I have a whole chapter in my book on that. Um,
Ooh, I
I
love it.
do, because I really I love that you said that, because I think it's such an important part of our conditioning. This whole idea that independence is sexy, is what you're striving for. And not only are we not independent in all the ways that you said, but I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have these lights. I wouldn't have my computer. I wouldn't have a car. I wouldn't be able to go to the grocery store, except for thousands and millions of people who I will never meet.
Mhm.
And we're 100% dependent for our existence on, and I think now, on everybody in the whole world. And the reason
Yeah,
why I say that is because look at 9/11. It took a very small group of very angry, unsatisfied, whatever happened to the people who attacked the United States, um, to turn our world upside down. So,
yes,
do our human relations, not only here at home with one another, matter? Does it matter about the kid in the school that's bullied? Yeah, because it could be my child that gets shot, right?
yeah.
Does it matter if we're bullies all over the world? Because it could be our country that gets attacked. And I think we don't want to see that. The idea
Yeah.
of independence and the self-made man, like you say, is so sort of romantic, or, I don't know, ego boosting or whatever it is, that we forget that actually, and this is one of the beauties of psychotherapy, and I would ask you if you share this, is that it makes vulnerability and openness and admitting our faults and seeing not only our gifts, but the places where we are triggered or we have wounds. It makes that a strength. It makes that something to be, appreciated and lauded, because that's where real healing lies.
Oh, I definitely agree with that. And, I love Brene Brown's work on vulnerability. And I think she's been a game changer as far as like getting the word out there. Um, but, even though it's out there, people don't like it because it's uncomfortable.
Right. It's uncomfortable. And it is uncomfortable. But that's part of growth, is again, it comes back to that distress tolerance. Because when you can tolerate the distress of your own vulnerability, you actually have a chance to heal and grow.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's So, with the people who have experienced a lot of trauma, it seems like there's a trend of not being able to tolerate that discomfort. So, what do you say for that?
Well, I talk a lot about that also. And because that's something that I really learned as a therapist. You learn certain things in graduate school, and then you learn a lot of things on the ground with real people in your office, right?
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things I learned is that one of the greatest gifts of psychotherapy is, and again, no therapist is perfect, but we strive to be safe. And that means non-judgmental. That means if you come in and you tell me, oh my God, I had the worst morning, I was screaming at my kid and I felt so out of control and I feel horrible about it. And after she went to school, I was crying, you know, like we don't sit there in judgment and say, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
We don't do that. We make it safe for us to talk about the things that are really hard to talk about. And that means non-judgmental. And that doesn't mean we're not holding for you to not scream at your daughter that way. It doesn't mean I'm not talking about you.
It's okay. You can.
Right. No, but you know what I mean? None of us is going to do parenting perfectly, but we can do it better. And we can keep trying and we can keep catching ourselves and we can keep tolerating our own distress better and teaching that to our kids. And so if you have a therapist that can sit there and say, well, tell me what happened.
Yeah.
What was the moment where you lost it? And in that moment, what were you feeling and what were you believing about yourself that you think was the real trigger behind your explosion? And then we explore that. And then we look into your childhood and we look in where did that start? And how did where did that start in your life? Maybe you had a parent that screamed at you or, whatever. And then we unravel that. And with EMDR or inner child work or hypnotherapy or psychodynamic work or whatever modality your therapist is using, then we reprocess whatever that original trauma was. And there's no judgment involved because we all have that. There's no therapist that goes will walk into the room with you who had a perfect life.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I think Brene Brown says everybody has trauma. It's just a little T trauma or a big T trauma. Everybody's experience, life itself can be traumatic,
Right.
So this existence involves suffering, just period. Um, Dang it. I wanted to talk about this space that you're talking about of non-judgment and curiosity. Um, I was listening to Martha Beck talk about the right
Love her.
hemisphere versus the left hemisphere, and she was talking about kind of some of what you've talked about today, which is that the left hemisphere of the brain is where we learn norms, and that we condition kids to learn these norms and to think that they have to fit into these categories. And we condition them out of being in the right hemisphere of the brain, which is where more creativity and curiosity lives. And so, you know, I think what you're suggesting for a healing for our nation and for people is trying to change that. And I think it is, from my perspective, and you can tell me your perspective, I think it is in human nature to look for differences and to look for ways that I am better than somebody else. And I think that when we walk into rooms, we're often evaluating, where do I fit in? Where would I belong? And I think that's just natural in us. And so I think that we do have to be taught to consider, why is a difference bad? Why is
Yeah,
this difference bad?
I think it's complicated because I think some of it might be nature and a lot of it's also still nurture.
Ah,
Because I think we absorb our parents' biases from the very beginning. So if they like certain kinds of people or people who have certain professions or people who have a certain color skin or drive a certain car or live in a certain neighborhood or have a certain religion, we absorb all that. And so I think some of it's nature and some of it's nurture. And for my part, I feel like we have to focus on nurture because that's the part we have some
Yeah,
control.
that's
If
true.
yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, I think that's part of maturity is that we realize we're not the only person in the room. And that person who dyed their hair blue has every right to do that, even if I would never dye my hair blue, you know?
yeah,
I mean, do you know what I mean? It can be
yeah.
that loud. Um, and yes, and we do, but a lot of it, like you said, is like we're really trying to figure out where we fit in. Will I survive here? Will they like me? And a lot of that gets turned around to, do I like them? You know,
Ah, yes.
right? Right. Because that's a protective thing. And what if we brought up our children in a way that they didn't have to protect themselves? But I did want to say one quick thing about what you said, because I really liked the idea, and that is, I think it's a combination. I think we're always going to look for some level of conformity in order to like have some kind of order around us. And
Agreed. Yeah.
we have to have some kind of respect and honoring of our individuality. And I think they need to be in some kind of balance. And unfortunately, I think when people are, when society or our families or whatever are out of control or dysfunctional, the demand for conformity is much higher than the respect for our differences. Um, because I think and especially like in an abusive family, and I think that happens in abusive countries, there's just an absolute demand that you conform to this either way of thinking or this behavior or this way of dressing or this whatever. Um, and that urge to be our individual selves is never going to go away. And if it's not respected, it's going to become some kind of rebellion.
Yes. Yes. I have been writing letters like crazy. And I mentioned it, and it probably sounded a little threatening when I wrote it in my letter, but I said, if you don't act as the political leaders, people will feel desperate. And when people feel desperate, they get chaotic.
They do. And the other part of the right brain thing that I would really emphasize is, if you're in an environment where the demand for you to conform to other people's way of being or their values or their behaviors, or you're forced to listen to an outside authority much more than you can listen to your own, I think we actually really all suffer because people have an intuitive sense of right and wrong, of what they're drawn to, of what their gifts are, of where their place could be in the world. And if they're not allowed to follow that, I think two really big outcomes of that that really are a detriment to all of us are many people never do express their greatest gifts because they're
Yes.
shoved into, conforming to some idea of success that doesn't belong to them, and they're miserable or they're unsatisfied, and we don't get to experience their greatest gifts. And the other part that is also, I think, highly dangerous societally is if you've really been trained that it's dangerous to learn to listen to your own intuition about things, about people, about what's really going on. Like, we're very sensitive. That's a survival mechanism. So you might be saying something, but I'm picking up that you feel something different. If I'm not allowed to really trust my own intuition, I'm walking out into my adult life as if I had one leg tied behind me.
I think that's one of the biggest things that I work on with clients is learning to trust their intuition and their listen to their body. That's what I always say. Listen to your body because I think that while our body maybe, well, I don't know. I don't know if I even believe that. In some ways, I think that our body um, functions really automatically and not always the most brilliantly. But then in other ways, it is brilliant and we just don't pay attention to it.
Right.
We don't pay attention to what it's telling us, the direction it's pointing us in, and we don't learn to do that. Nobody teaches us to do that.
Absolutely. And, going back to what you said way back a while ago about EMDR works really well for one trauma. What I would say to that is sometimes there's an original trauma abandonment,
Ah.
abuse, neglect. But if it's not treated, we will inevitably create more and more traumas in our lives, not be, or we will experience them for exactly the reason that you said. If I've learned not to trust my intuition and not speak up when I feel afraid because I was punished for that, then when the next abusive person walks into my life, I'm not going to speak up and I'm going to have a trauma with them. And so it just multiplies and multiplies. So maybe there's an original trauma, but inevitably it will create more trauma if we don't have a chance to be safe and to heal. And I was relating that to the last thing you said, but now I forget what it was.
It's, oh, shoot, now I don't remember either. So either way,
Okay, okay,
it's still a fundamental truth, right?
right, right,
Um, and I think that's what your book is about, is these fundamental psychological truths and how they
right.
can. This is so beautiful, and I really could talk about this forever. I I wish that we were taught these things. I tell my clients, um, I think that I'm really understanding of a lot. When once I hear somebody's story, I can understand where they're coming from.
Exactly,
And
exactly,
I think that, that's what makes it easy for me to be less judgmental, because I know your story. I know where you're coming from. A stranger on the street that maybe saw you screaming at your kid, I mean, of course, I would look at that differently than somebody whose story I know and I understand.
right,
So,
right,
I think at the bottom of that is just trying to be understanding.
right. And the world of psychology has so much to offer us in terms of really picking that apart and understanding, the person who's beating their kid did not get born that way. Yes, we do not want them to do that. And if they don't stop, of course, we want to separate them from their child. But that's the tip of the iceberg. The real, what's underneath is their own unhealed trauma that as a society, if we were committed to treating ourselves and everyone else for the worst of what happened to them. And as a society, if we were committed to not perpetrating those same kinds of traumas on masses of people, because that's really why I wrote the book. What what an individual abuser can do to their family members, we're doing on mass scale to masses of people. And how can we not expect that those people are going to become just as symptomatic as a child who's beaten or neglected or given shaming, blaming, horrible messages in their home?
That's very true. It makes me really sad. And I have a theory that because of the trauma and abuse so many people in the country have already experienced, they're not seeing it.
That's exactly right. And unfortunately, and I say this probably at great risk to myself, that that many people whose outcome from a dysfunctional or abusive home is to identify with the aggressor often look for positions of power because that's where they can do what they learned to do to survive.
And that's where they feel safe,
That's
in the
right.
position of power. Oh,
And we're
God.
suffering from a lot of that, and not just in America, but around the world, but very much so in America today.
So, one thing that I am trying to focus on, because I always try to come back to, okay, what can I do? What
That's right.
can we do? Um, is focus for me on my community and, um, you know, obviously treat people kindly, right? That's an
Right.
easy one.
Right.
Um, but even trying to just foster this idea of like, hey, we're in this together, and we are powerful together. We can do anything together. And I
Right.
do believe that. I really do. And maybe getting 350 million people on the same page is a little unrealistic. I don't know. We'll see. Um, but at least in my immediate area, I can try and foster that. Where would you tell people to start?
Well, I think there's several places, and I agree with you. I mean, I think I hope and I believe we're all good. We're all born good people. So I believe that we're all born innocent. Where science tells us we're wired for love and belonging when we come into this world. And to the extent that we don't manifest love and belonging, we've been injured by our human relations.
Mm,
And I've never seen that not be true with anybody that I've worked with. So, a commitment to love and belonging in your own life might mean going to therapy or doing some other kind of healing modality on the places in your life where you feel like you're not able to either express the kind of love and inclusion with other people that you'd like to, or where you can't give that to yourself, where you're not manifesting your own gifts that you know are in there. I had a moment when I was a really young adult, and I still remember it. I was walking up my driveway, the sun was shining. And I had this moment where I realized there was so much more inside of me than I was able to manifest in the world. And I wanted it to be able to come out. And I had no idea why it was so locked up inside of me. And it was because of childhood trauma that I had not yet healed. And I didn't realize that until a little later. But I really remember that moment. We're all born with incredible gifts. So any healing modality that and whether it's just talking to a friend or looking for therapy, or it might be that you really give yourself to what you love, your art, your music, animals, gardening, because all of that ignites that life force that's healthy and helps you connect. Will, doing your art heal your trauma? I don't know. I think there's more direct ways to do that. But if that's what you have, go for it. Look for people who are safe. Talk, dare to be vulnerable in a setting that's safe. Uh,
yeah.
because I don't know if you've had this experience, but we had this great big family reunion many years ago, and a lot of the people in that family are very, um, they don't talk about their feelings.
Oh,
They just don't. That's not what they do. And
yeah.
my daughter, who is the total opposite, so we were gathered around the table and we were kind of giving thanks for the person we were celebrating. And my daughter shared something very vulnerable because that's who she is. And it changed the entire room.
Mm,
Everybody became vulnerable. Everybody shared something, even the people that you would never expect. Um, Felt safe because she set the way. And so we can be that for other people, dare to say, like, I didn't have a great day, rather than I need to look good, you know,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but also, if you're up to something like you are, people who have some kind of handle on what's going on, speak out, write to your legislators, write articles, start programs. People are doing it all over the country. They're
Yeah.
just not necessarily in the news.
Right. I love to look for that stuff, and I tell my clients, if you find it, send it to me because
Right. Right.
I want to see it.
Right.
And I try to send them things that I find too, not for them to join, but just for them to have a sense of hope. Because another thing that I'll mention real quick, because I do have to end here soon, is that I've found a lot of my clients who have experienced trauma are too tired. They're too tired. They don't have the energy to keep fighting, is the words that they use. And I don't blame them for that. Their whole life has been a fight. And so I for me, I feel like in that case, okay, then I will pick up the torch for you.
Right. And it's a really good point, because if you have unhealed trauma, then a lot of your life force energy is just trying to help you survive or repress it so you don't feel it all the time. And you don't have access to all of the life force energy that you otherwise could be expressing in much more creative and, whatever constructive ways in the world. So again, you know, if we're traumatizing people, we're actually depriving ourselves of the gifts that they have to offer. How do we know? I say this to myself all the time. How do we know that that child who's lost and neglected in an inner city school, who's has a, an addicted home life or parents who are, abandoned them, how do we know that they wouldn't have been the next person to heal cancer? We don't
Mm,
know that.
that's
They
true.
never had a chance to be there, or just a loving parent. It doesn't have to be that they did some, world-stopping thing, but we don't know what's in people until we give them a chance.
Well, and I love that you said that because I feel like a lot of people they would never consider that. They look at that person as the scum of society and that's it. That's their whole identity. And I've had the privilege of knowing that's not true.
Me
But
too.
a lot of others I think don't get that opportunity.
And that's why we're sharing this, right? Because we're
Yeah.
just trying to help inform each other of the best that we've learned.
Yes. Okay. We do have to end,
Okay.
sadly. But thank you so much. I really appreciated this conversation. I felt it in my heart, and I hope everybody else does too.
Well, thank you so much. I love talking with you. Yeah, I think we're on the same page.
Okay, wonderful. I will talk to you soon then.
Thank you.
All right, bye.